Okay, so it's 5 minutes past, so I think we can at least begin with introductions and then hopefully everyone who wanted to join will be there in time for the presentation. So like I was just saying, Jennifer Brinkhurst and Kaylee Morrison are our new co-chairs for the Research Coordinators Working Group as of 2024. So I'm just gonna let them introduce themselves, and Jennifer, you can go first, and then Kaylee.
Sure. So my name's Jennifer, and I've been working with the thrombosis group for almost 2 years now in Ottawa as a multi-center research coordinator, which means that I'm typically working from home and coordinating our investigator-led multi-center trials. So right now I'm working on SAVOR, which we have Canadian sites. We've got 14, and we're bringing on another 9 sites in France, about 10 sites in Italy, and then we have a few other countries coming up as well, including Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Argentina, possibly Belgium, and then Germany and Australia. So that's my big project. So looking forward to working with you guys and sharing some of my knowledge.
Hi everyone, my name is Kaylee. I'm a research coordinator out of Niagara Health at the St. Catharines Hospital. I'm fairly new in the coordinator space. I've only been doing it for about 1.5 years now. But I work primarily in thrombosis as well, with a little bit of stroke and neurology studies too. We are participating in SAVOR, Trimline, the Antho studies, and looking to take on a few more industry-sponsored and investigator-initiated studies this year. So excited for that.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So Jennifer, I'll hand it over to you. Are you okay to share your screen for the slides? Okay, perfect.
I'm just going to turn off my video though, because then I can see my slides and presentation a little bit better, which is on a different screen. Just oops. There we go. Okay. And all right. Okay, so you guys can see my slides all right?
We cannot see them right now.
Oh. Okay, let me try something different. This here. How about now?
Yeah, we can see them. Yeah, perfect. Yeah, looks good.
Okay, great. So welcome to our first meeting of the CanVECTOR Research Coordinators Working Group for 2024. Thank you to everybody who is able to join us. We really appreciate this networking opportunity that we can have with our research coordinators, and thank you for our patient partner presentation or representation today. Carol, it's great to see you again. So today I'm going to be talking to you about central research ethics application process, and I'm taking an Ontario perspective because I am here in Ontario, and we work with CTO a lot with our multi-center trials. So I'm going to run through the process that we do as a multi-center coordinator in Ontario. So first, our learning objectives are to familiarize research coordinators with the REB application process, and then also to differentiate between what is central and what is institutional approval processes. So first, why use CTO? And I took this quote off of their website. They say it better than I could. So CTO's streamlined research ethics review program makes clinical trials more efficient and cost-effective by enabling a single ethics review for multi-site studies. CTO Stream enables all research sites participating in a multi-site research study to undergo a single ethics review rather than separately applying to their local research ethics boards. This reduces the time and labor required to obtain research ethics approval. So first, how does it work? The application is first divided into two parts. There is the provincial application and then the center applications. And there is also an REB of record. So this is determined based on the design of the project and the sponsor or investigator completing the provincial application. So typically, if you're associated with a site that has the ability to be the REB of record, then that particular investigator or site would then become the REB of record. So often when we're applying for applications here in Ottawa, our OSIN REB will be our REB of record. However, all cancer trials are reviewed by Ontario Cancer Research Ethics Board, also known as REB. I'm not talking about any of the pediatric, the CHEER trials, because I'm not familiar with them. So first, getting started is to decide, is CTO the right way to go? So essentially, the way to figure this out is if you have at least 2 Ontario sites, then you want to use CTO. And these sites need to be considered participating sites. So there is a list that CTO has where for which sites have a CTO participation agreement. It continues to grow. It's so much bigger now than it was 5 years ago. So most of the centers that are conducting research in Ontario are on this participating sites list. Where you might run into some centers that are not part of it might be some of your community centers or your smaller clinics that are maybe not part of an academic institution. That being said, there is an application process through the site where they can become a participating site. Who submits the provincial application? Typically, this is prepared by the multi-center coordinator or the research coordinator in charge of the project, and it's reviewed and signed by the principal investigator, who is also known as the provincial applicant. So some of the documentation that you're going to need to create your application, first and foremost, is your study protocol. If you're working on a Health Canada trial, you will need your NOL, which is your letter of no objection. You can, however, upload this at a later date if you don't yet have it. You'll need your product monograph, investigational brochure, depending on the type of study that you are conducting. You'll need a provincial informed consent form, for which there is a template that is required to be used and can then be later adjusted for your center specific requirements, such as logos, contact details, and such. You'll need to upload any of the patient materials. So this is anything that will be going to a study participant, including reminder cards, diaries, questionnaires, any type of marketing materials like posters that are in your patient-facing areas. If you're going to be doing any other promotional marketing, all of that needs to be uploaded as well. Your DSMB charter, your monitoring plan, your sponsor's study budget, any of your data collection demographic pages. So it used to be that there was a time REBs, and I believe some still do, but most no longer, would require every single one of your case report forms, any data collection that is being done. They've now reduced that so that it's only anything that's collecting your demographics. So age, sex, race, gender, there's a few more as well that fall under that category. So any of the collection forms that have the demographics, that's the pages that you'll need to upload. None of the other variables, they're not concerned about them. And then, of course, if you are translating materials, then you'll need to upload the translated material along with translation certificates. I did take a look to see if there were any specific requirements for French and English, and I didn't see anything. So I think that this becomes an institutional practice. So here at TOH in Ottawa, we have to have our documentation both in French and English, because that's the majority of the population of patients that we have. We can use some other translations for other languages that are spoken in the community as well, but French and English for us is a requirement. You also have to have your end of study archiving and destruction plan, destruction for your documents, destruction for your investigational products. How are you going to destroy the electronic records? All of that needs to be in a study archiving and destruction plan. So once the documents are approved at the provincial level, these no longer need to be approved at the provincial level. And this is the streamlined process of using CTO. So the protocol will be approved by the provincial level, and then from there at the central level, you no longer need to then apply the protocol. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop, where then we'll just look at the center applications, which is very specific to the institution that is applying under the CIA. So who submits the center application? This is typically prepared by the local research coordinator in charge of the project. At most sites, some sites, this will still be the multi-center trial coordinator if their site is participating in the trial as well. That's determined by the design of your program. And it's reviewed and signed by the site qualified investigator, also known as the center principal investigator. So what do you need for a center application? You need to know your expected start date and number of expected enrolled participants at your site. You need to know your recruitment plan. You need to have your site-specific informed consent form with track changes using the provincial ICF as your starting document, and then upload a clean version of that as well. And then any site-specific materials that you will be given to study participants, and any site-specific translated material and translation certificates as required. So one thing that's important to note is a new process that started, it might have been 2022, but it could have been 2023 with REB, is that the site ICFs are no longer needing to be submitted to REB as the board of record. Instead, the consent guidelines for REB centers document is uploaded where the ICF is expected to be. Because the field is mandatory, you have to upload something. So REB has basically a note to file that you upload in that place instead. They know that it's very minor changes that are being done to the ICF, so they don't need to see it as long as the provincial one has been approved. All right, so your provincial and your center approvals are in. Now what? So from a multi-center coordinator perspective, we want to make sure that there are clinical trial agreements in place between the sponsoring site and the subsites. And so some of the approvals that you need at your own institution to consider as well. Do you need to have a shortened version of an ethics application? So at the Ottawa Hospital, we have a form called CRRF, and I wish I remembered what the acronym stood for, but at the moment I don't. And this will trigger contracts and departmental impact requirements. This is why we have this process. It's not a full REB application. It's basically a notice to the REB of a study that will be happening, a notice to the departments that are impacted, and their approval that that's okay, and to ensure all contracts necessary have been put in place. And once we have all three sections approved, then we get our institutional approval, and that allows us to move forward. the approval letter should be provided to the multi-center coordinator for their study essential files binder. So if you have this additional approval requirement at your institute, then once you have a letter saying you have your go-ahead, you can activate, you're good to go, then that should be submitted to your multi-center coordinator. So there are some other provincial forms that you will need to be aware of. Once you have approval of your initial protocol, many of us know that there are other things that will happen. There will be amendments, there are annual reviews, and there are events that are reportable. So anytime an amendment is required for a protocol, a provincial amendment form will need to be completed. Continuing review annually, the REB will require continuing review forms. Once the provincial continuing review is approved, then CTO will review and grant approval to center continuing review forms. There are reportable events. These include your Data Safety Monitoring Board or Committee reports. It includes interim analyses, any safety notice or updates, periodic external AE or SUSAR reports, not local, and a single, not a local, adverse event. So if one of your centers has a reportable adverse event, then the provincial form needs to be completed on that. And then study closure. And like the provincial application process, there are other forms that are intended for the center. So some forms that you may need to submit are an amendment. So if a provincial amendment changes your ICF or recruitment practices, then a center amendment must be submitted. If a change is being done at the local level, even without a provincial amendment, like a change in PI, for instance, then you would need to also submit an amendment. So what I mean by recruitment practices is, you know, if we're now going to give a questionnaire that we didn't give previously, that's going to change the consent form, and it's also changing your recruitment process because there's an additional step that is being done. It could mean that we're opening up to not just enroll from a clinic. It could mean that we're also going to enroll from the emergency department, and that wasn't previously declared. So those are some recruitment practice changes that would require an amendment. Continuing review. So these can be submitted at the same time as the provincial continuing review, but they're not going to be approved by CTO until after approval of the provincial level. So they can all be submitted at the same time. It'll just not be reviewed yet until provincial is approved. So some reportable events at the center level would be a local SAE. And this is something, it needs to meet the reportable definition of serious and related or possibly related to the study drug as per Health Canada. So we know that we are collecting, in most of our studies, we're collecting adverse events and what we define as a serious adverse event, which is not necessarily the Health Canada reportable SAE. Happy to talk further if anybody needs clarification on that later. Any protocol deviation or violation. So these are also now being known as a minor deviation or a major deviation. And these are reportable if there's an effect to patient safety or study outcomes, etc., which is really considered a major deviation. So if you have a study going on and there was a form that was meant to be completed, like a questionnaire, and it wasn't completed, for the study, that would be a deviation because it did not happen as per the protocol, but it's not reportable because it doesn't affect the patient safety or the study outcomes. If there is a privacy breach, any breach is required to be reported on CTO, but also to your privacy office. If there's an audit or inspection report, whether it's Health Canada or your own institution. If there is a complaint, and other, which I'm not really sure what that actually entails. I'd have to dig further in to see what kind of forms pop up. And of course, your center study closure. So this might be in line with the provincial study closure, or it might be sooner if there's a reason for a center to be closed. So I just want to thank everyone for listening. I hope you found this really helpful. I am happy to help out at any time. Please feel free to reach out to me. I've listed my email address here. I am doing my best to be able to be reached at most times and responsive. I really do believe in helping your colleagues and sharing your knowledge. I've got over 15 years of experience that I am happy to share with all of you. So thank you for listening. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm just going to end this load. All right, and turn my video on.
Thanks so much for your presentation, Jennifer. That was super detailed, and I'm sure it was helpful to everyone. So I see Carol has her hand up. So yeah, Carol, if you want to go ahead.
I think I saw Kaylee with her hand up, or was it a thumbs up?
I just put the clapping.
Ah, what a nice group. What a nice group. I knew I liked you, apart from all the work you do. So again, you know, as the co-lead of the patient partner group, I'm really happy to have had the benefit of walking through this presentation for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was recruited by a research coordinator, so recruited into the CanVECTOR process and family, if you want, during a clinical trial that I had put my hand up for, so that's great. But secondly, participating as a patient partner in some studies, you know, we often get told, oh, it's ethics board issues to explain delays or to explain additional requirements or other kinds of things. So from a patient perspective, the ethics boards sometimes, and the ethics review process sometimes to be a thorn in our side. And again, in terms of better understanding, this was very helpful. So, and some of the projects that I'm involved with are multi-center, but multi-center outside of Ontario as well. And Jennifer, I know you talked about the streamlining within Ontario. A couple of just general questions. Number one is, who selects the ethics boards? And are there criteria for the ethics board members? Are there ethics boards that are sort of standing ethics boards, and it doesn't matter what the research project is, the project will go to them? And are there terms of reference that are either public or not public, but certainly maybe public to the research teams? And secondly, and this gets back to my comment about process, are there service standards with respect to this process? Again, Jennifer, having you walk through the process is just unbelievable to me in terms of, the T's that have to be crossed and the I's that have to be dotted. And I mean, you must all be exhausted by the time you get there. It's really, with reason, but it's really it seems to me as an outsider, a cumbersome process. So anything, you want to say with respect to those kinds of concerns, I guess, but need for information on our part as patients?
Sure, I'll respond to your second question first. So there's a lot of oversight, and typically once you hit submit, there's a validation process. So if you haven't, if you've missed anything that's required, it won't let you go for signature. And so you have to have all of that finalized. And typically there's an administrative review, again, to ensure everything is appropriate prior to it being submitted to the ethics review board. And then in terms of who decides for the board of record, there is an application process through CTO where the research ethic boards would have put through an application. And they would identify their strengths in terms of, you know, what they're good for types of studies and what areas and topics and such that they have specialties, a specialty in for reviewing. They also would need to declare their membership, how many members, the community members, the scientific members, the specific breakdowns. And then essentially, as I mentioned in my presentation, the site that's doing the application, where the academic center is that the principal investigator resides, if their site has a specialty at that level for this type of study that they're doing, then that'll automatically go to their site. So if I were in Kingston, for instance, and doing an application for an investigator or scientist in Kingston, then as long as the topic of the study meets the criteria that their REB has set that they can review, then Kingston would become the board of record. So in Ottawa, because we have a large, a huge research program, we typically, most times, our studies will be through our OSIN REB.
Can I just step? Yeah, sorry, Jennifer, to interrupt you. It's Elena Shlikovsky. In response of Jennifer Carol Weiss' question, who chooses the REB and who is it comprised on? First of all, it's been appointed by the head of institution who will be on this board. And secondly, it will be physicians, clinical staff, members of the community, lawyers, and individuals knowledgeable in ethics and privacy.
Thank you.
Welcome.
May I just ask another question?
Sure.
And that is, how often, in your experience and everybody's experience, I guess, how often are amendments necessary? And how often do amendments come forward? Because again, I've been in a couple of studies where there, for one reason or another, the amendments are necessary. And again, we always feel like, you know, are we done yet, sort of?
I don't know that there's an exact answer for that. I can tell you that in a pilot study, a feasibility study, there might be more because they are working out the kinks of the study. In an RCT, it could be that there's new information or that there's a practice that's prohibitive of what we thought we could achieve, and so we need to pivot. So I wouldn't say it happens very often. It shouldn't happen. It's a red flag if there's a lot of amendments. But I think you can typically expect 1 to 2 at minimum per study, because there's only so much, like, you think you've planned for everything, but then real life happens and you haven't planned for something. So those are reasons why we would have an amendment. Kaylee, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just going to speak a bit to that, and also just like the time consuming aspect of working through ethics applications. From the site perspective, I find myself on a day-to-day, like I do recruitment and screening for patients, as well as the ethics applications and things like that. And since starting, I've gone through many phases where it's like very ethics heavy, especially when you're starting up, obviously, new studies. It can be very time consuming. But then even in December, we basically went through a period where all of our studies had an amendment at one point. And so it can almost mean that you have to put recruitment aside or on pause for you to work through the administrative stuff of collecting the documents required for the amendment, especially if it's an industry or pharma sponsored study. That can be quite time consuming as well, and often means that when you submit, there's even additional feedback from the ethics board. It's not just submitting and approving. We actually had a study where we submitted for one amendment, and while that was under review, they came out with a second amendment. So we had to wait for the first amendment to be approved, and the second it was, you had to start working on the new amendment. So it can be a little bit time consuming, but fortunately right now, going through a phase where I don't have any ethics action going on, and it just feels like I have so much time on my hands.
Okay. Yeah, and coming back to the amendments, it's always event-driven issue that force the creator of this protocol to revise it again and definitely submit it to ethics committee that represents the human rights of the subjects that recruited. It always comes from the safety point of view.
At least in the moment I can see, I can like yes. Yes. Oh,
Oh, do we have any more questions?
you're a tough cookie.
Tanya,
Oh
you're
yeah,
a tough
sorry.
cookie too. Did you want to mute?
Oh yeah, Carol, go ahead.
My apologies for this, but I know that it's so useful for us to better understand. So Jennifer, you gave a great overview of streamlining within the province of Ontario. But what happens when we're dealing with institutions that are in different provinces? And you know, is there, and again, it's the same research study, the same design. Have you encountered issues, or does it come up where there may be ethics board issues or comments that you see or hear in one province and not in another? And if so, how are those resolved?
So first, I'll mention that Quebec has a very similar streamlined approach. So any of our sites on the Quebec side will go through their central process with our approval as their as part of that application process. I also deal with Alberta. I have Calgary and Edmonton, and they're separate. They're their own institutional REBs. It's not a central REB process for Alberta. So yes, there are sometimes issues. Some REBs will require different things. Like I mentioned before, some REBs will require a full list of all of the variables to be included in the study, where in Ontario, our REBs are now down to only the demographics, because those are the potential, the PHIPAA, PI, private, you know, the privacy ones that we're concerned about. So that could be an issue, or they might have an issue with the way something is worded in a consent form, but it's a required portion of the consent. So there's a back and forth of how best, you know, to meet the needs of the study. I can't think of anything else right now, but I know that there's definitely been some things, and it could be even with the recruitment plan. And it is working out the kinks in your own center so that you can best align with the study. And sometimes it does mean your own special operating procedure. That's been done in the past for some of my studies as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, another thing that different REBs might ask for is like translation of documents. Obviously in Quebec, the documents definitely have to be in French and then English, I guess, depending on your institution. But I found with my study, I didn't have to have a French translation for the provincial ethics application, but then Ottawa specifically, they asked to have the French translation as well. So that's another thing that differs based on your institution. So do we have anyone maybe from the Eastern province, like the Maritimes, who might maybe be able to shed some light on their process? Because I think from what I understand, they like at least Nova Scotia doesn't, like I don't think they have a centralized process. It's still like based on each institution. Yep. Maybe, yeah, maybe not. It's probably Ontario and Quebec. Yeah.
I'm seeing Alberta, and Ontario and Quebec.
Yeah. So I guess are Ontario and Quebec the only provinces right now that have this streamlined process? Maybe.
I'm not positive about the East Coast. I want to say that there is a streamlined process, but it might just be Halifax and not Nova Scotia as a whole that I'm thinking.
Right.
So
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Did anyone have any other questions about REB applications or anything they wanted to add or any experiences they wanted to share? Okay, that's good, I guess. I guess between all of us, we have quite a lot of experience with REBs. So I think with that, we can end the meeting. So everyone, thank you very much for joining. And yeah, as I already said, this recording will be up on the CanVECTOR website. So if you want to share it with your colleagues or if anyone else wants to see it, you can go ahead. And then, yeah, we'll be in touch soon about our next meeting. And if there's any topics, you want to discuss, obviously we'd be happy to accommodate that. So thanks everyone and have a nice afternoon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Thanks for all you
Bye.
do.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.